All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer. The views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another Roundup on Bell Curve. You got Michael's 1 and 2, Yano and Miles, our sixth man. Well, sports reference.
You think Vance is getting nervous? 2 back-to-back weeks, sitting him out, benched him.
No, I would be if I was him.
I would be too.
Yeah. Six-man of the year award right here, at the very least. Yeah. You know.
Personally, I don't know if I'm going to accept Vance back on this podcast if he has any hair. I think he's got to go bald. That's how he's got to prove himself. No, we miss you, Vance. Vance is representing over in Japan. So,
all right. What do you think about his Japan trip? Any alpha from the other side?
Only stuff I've heard so far is that crypto is pervasive in Asia, and a lot more so integrated into social applications and just more. It seems to be something that is more embraced positively over there, which I think is a really good sign.
Yeah, he said he paid for his sushi with ETH.
Exactly.
Why he would spend his ETH at a time like this, I do not know, but
not a true believer. Not a true believer.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some of these stories. So I want to talk. Maybe we can kick this off just talking about Uniswap and their wallet being finally available on the Apple App Store. So this was following a month of review by Apple. Uniswap's mobile app has finally secured its place in the iOS App Store. It's now available for users in most countries, which includes the United States, according to a tweet from Uniswap Labs on Thursday. And Uniswap has assured people that they're going to continue to launch in other countries as soon as Apple lets them. So in addition to allowing swaps on the Ethereum mainnet, Polygon, Arbitrum, and Optimism, users will also be able to track their NFT collections and purchase crypto with debit cards through MoonPay, which was an integration which was actually rolled out, I guess, last December. That's pretty cool. That solves a big onboarding problem. But Miles, I know you actually were a guinea pig and actually installed the wallet yourself and have some thoughts. But before we do that, Michael, I think on one of the earlier bell curves we were talking about the restriction that crypto apps not being able to get distributed on the Apple App Store app. So what are your sort of thoughts on the Uniswap mobile wallet making its way through?
Yeah. So historically, Apple has been incredibly difficult when anything ever touches crypto involved with an app that's under review by their App Store review process. And just as context, the review process is not something that's just there for any sort of crypto app. Historically, there's been back and forth with major applications like Uber. I know that they got in trouble for some of the things that they've done. And really what the review process represents for any app that's trying to get into the App Store is a walled garden approach where they are the gatekeepers. They get to decide who's in there, who's not, and they effectively set the rules. When Apple has the App Store review guidelines, which are very infrequently updated and a lot of people would probably say that they're antiquated in a lot of ways. The way to think about them isn't a constitution that says, here are all the rules, here's how we're going to be dealing with these different types of applications into perpetuity. Think of them as like an auto-append list of rules that they decide kind of ad hoc as they see new applications. And so earlier, I think it was in October or November maybe, they came out with kind of a general perspective on specifically NFTs, where they said that NFTs, when you're purchasing an NFT in an application, would have to go through IAP, which is their in-app purchase mechanism. A lot of people, I'd say you had kind of polar perspectives on this adjustment, where you had some people who said, what the heck, IAP is great, but what is implicit within IAP is that Apple charges 30% to the seller of anything that goes through IAP. So if you're selling an NFT, for instance, which is considered digital content, Apple wants their 30%. Obviously, if you're selling anything in a secondary transaction, it's going to be exceedingly difficult to have 30% be a take rate effectively that the seller would have to abide by using this mechanism. And so this is definitely for NFTs, and it's specific to that one category of purchasing. But it did show a positive trajectory in just Apple being supportive and having rules around crypto writ large. And so that was kind of the other perspective. And some people said, hey, we're used to, game developers are used to paying 30% for any digital content that's sold within the application. And in fact, the fact that you get hundreds of millions of credit cards on file using IAP is actually more of a benefit than having to pay the 30%. The one thing that is, of note here is that because I believe, and I haven't played around with it, so Miles, I'm curious to hear your perspectives. Uniswap, I believe, is going to leverage a non-custodial wallet. And there's a difference between what Apple considers to be a convertible virtual currency like Ethereum versus what they would consider to be digital content in NFT. And that's the reason why MoonPay is, the payment provider. They have to, whoever the payment provider is, has to have money transmitter licenses to be able to facilitate transactions with convertible virtual currencies. But in doing so, convertible virtual currencies are explicitly outside the scope of IAP. And it's not something that Apple will support. And so you won't have to pay the 30% fees, but it's only supported assets that Apple will be able to, or that MoonPay supports, that you'll be able to use in those apps. Once you get the assets into the app, that's when you can swap them around. But you can imagine if you want to buy something, that's maybe not supported directly by MoonPay, the process would go USD to Ethereum to whatever that asset is. The user experience is clunky, to say the least. But I do think that generally the recognition of Apple having an app that's going to be as widely used as Uniswap is a really big deal. And I'm sure it'll get better over time. But the biggest thing that can happen for an app developer is to get approved. It's a lot harder to get approved than it is to, have changes that go on once you're approved in the App Store, because it's more of a conversation, less binary go, no go.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Miles, I'd be curious to get your take of like what the UI UX was like. Just because, on the one hand, I think, we've talked on this podcast before about, like, I know I was in the minority when I voiced this, but that it's a big deal that you can now buy in custody, at least Bitcoin, and I think Ethereum as well on Fidelity. So it does seem like getting access to distribution that the App Store provides is definitely a huge boon. So I think in that sense, it's pretty interesting. But Miles, I would love to get your understanding of what you thought about the user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to touch on one thing, last thing on Michael's point, I'd be very interested to hear like what the discussions in the past month have sounded like between, the Uniswap Labs teams and Apple, because it sounded like they were just getting stonewalled. There was basically radio silence for a long time. It almost reminded me of, Coinbase shouting into the void for, the SEC to tell them what to do in order to be okay. But yeah, I think maybe at some point we'll hear how those conversations went. Very interesting.
It does seem like, Miles, like there were some changes. Do you remember when they maybe several months ago, or 3 or 4 months ago, talked about this app coming out, and there were like NFTs inside the app. There was a way to import private keys. There was they talked about support for multi-chain. I did notice that there's no support for multi-chain, no way to import a private key. I think I haven't actually used it. And then I don't think there were NFTs inside the app.
There are. Yeah.
There are. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as I can tell, it is, they did put out what they advertised. Like I can.
Okay.
You have one.
Okay. Then I'm wrong. I was thinking maybe they pulled it, like basically pulled back, did a preliminary version to kind of get their foot in the door. But okay.
Exactly.
Hey everyone, exciting announcement here from the Blockworks Podcast Network. We are hiring 2 podcast hosts to build a show with us called Lightspeed. TLDR of Lightspeed is that it is a show for builders, tinkerers, and lovers of technology. It's a callback to the heyday of Silicon Valley, where great tech was built in garages, not in corporate fortresses, and was truly the Wild West. Lightspeed is an exploration of crypto from the perspective of a builder and an engineer who's designing for scale and is interested in onboarding the next billion users into crypto. If this show sounds exciting to you, you have a background in podcast hosting or content creation, go to the careers page of Blockworks. That's blockworks.co/careers. I've also linked it in the show notes here. You can just click there. It'll take you right to the page. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm Mike
@Ippolito_. You can just slide right into my DMs and we'll set up some time to talk. Would love to hear from you. We are super, super excited about this show.
My overall, high level take is that it's a decent V1. If I had to have like a criticism, I would say that, it doesn't provide a better experience than existing wallets for sophisticated crypto native users. But it also, that's one side of the spectrum, but it also doesn't necessarily, simplify the experience enough for, brand new crypto users. I think that latter category is the intended audience that they're going for with this wallet. They know sophisticated crypto users are very comfortable, interacting either directly with the protocol or on the UI. And so this is going after retail, right? And mainstream retail that might have been using a Coinbase or an FTX in the last cycle. And so that's basically that's the perspective of, the user I took as I tried to onboard. And yeah, I guess some high level thoughts. I would say wallet creation is very easy. You could use an iCloud backup and Google social auth login to create a wallet, not have to remember, back up your keys if you want to. The fiat on-ramp process is pretty straightforward and simple. It took a couple minutes for USDC to show up in my actual account balance. But I would say there's a few big pain points if I was, a brand new crypto user who is trying this out for the first time. And I would say that, when you're onboarding from MoonPay, it gives you, all these different networks, right? So Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, and each token has 4 different versions of it, right? That you can on-ramp to. And so I'd, first be like, what the hell are all these networks? And why is there 4 different versions of every token? I have no idea what this means. Like, is there something I should know about if I onboard to Optimism? Is that, does that have features that Arbitrum doesn't have, or does it have less features than Ethereum has? So there's not much of a education there. Yeah.
Miles, what would you do? Would you default just to one network, but then give people the option to do others, like switch?
Yeah, I maybe I'll get to that at the end because I think it's related to the other pain points. And I think, so I just chose USDC and Optimism, and it did show up in my wallet, a few minutes later, which is great. But now, okay, I want to go swap that for another token. Let's say, my friend said, hey, you should buy this, Lido token. It's gonna moon. And so I say, okay, let's look for Lido. Fortunately, Lido was in the Optimism asset list, but I noticed that the Optimism asset list is a lot smaller than the Ethereum asset list. A brand new crypto user might not know why, right? But okay, great. I've got, USDC and I want to swap to Lido. And now it's telling me that I don't have enough ETH in my wallet and to pay for the transaction fees. And as a new user, I'd be like, what does that mean? That's annoying. Okay, now I have to let's go swap for some ETH so I can pay these transaction fees. And again, don't have enough ETH to make that swap, right? So now I'm stuck going back to square one with the fiat on-ramp and saying, okay, now I need to, on-ramp fiat directly to ETH so I have some gas to spend. And that part wasn't clear to me. And so I think that there are like two main things that would make this, really, really powerful for a mainstream user. First, I think that, you need to abstract away all these networks and different types of assets. And so I would say, if there could just be one asset, version of every asset that shows up to the user, and you don't have any sort of differentiation about networks. And then you basically just say, if a user wants to swap from USD to Lido, this, runs through some sort of like bridge DEX aggregator that looks at all the Uniswap markets, finds you, the most efficient path to buy that based off of gas fees and liquidity and slippage and all that good stuff. And then I have it in my wallet. And whether that's, Lido sitting on Optimism or Lido sitting on Arbitrum or L1, I don't really care. I have exposure to Lido now. Like I got what I wanted. And then 2, and I think this kind of, leads into a bigger conversation, but with account abstraction, there's a lot of things that would make this experience a lot more frictionless. first of all, get rid of gas fees. Like going back to square one, if I was a new user, I would have probably churned right there. I don't want to go through that again. So pay gas fees on behalf of users. I think that's more than reasonable. And you also have, more secure account recovery methods than maybe this EOA path, using the iCloud backup, and you can split keys and all that good stuff too. And so, yeah, I think that those are the two main things that I would say to take this to the next level. When you go in your Coinbase wallet, right, it doesn't tell you which network, of which network version of every asset you want to buy, right? And I just don't. I worry that V1, it's a great start, but it's kind of in no man's land where it's not necessarily catering to the sophisticated crypto native users, but it's and it's not trying to, frankly, but it needs to a couple more improvements to really compete with like a centralized exchange app for newbies, right? Folks that have not ever tried this before. So that's my product review.
Miles, why do you think that this is just for? Why do you say that they're really focusing on like new folks here? Because my understanding, like when I think about this product, I don't think that like a new user to crypto who owns no Bitcoin and no ETH, like I don't think they're going direct to Uniswap here. This product feels like for the four of us, where the four of us been in crypto for a while, own crypto, still don't have a mobile experience, like a crypto native mobile experience. And like I've wanted to use the MetaMask app for years. It's just god awful. Like that's who I thought this product would be for.
That's fair. I think the main objective is to capture retail flow with this app, right?
That's what should look like Robinhood, right? It's like that would be the
Whether that's retail flow that is, an existing crypto user, that's a relatively small bubble, right? And then whether it's retail flow that's maybe just a centralized exchange user, that's at least 100 million people right there. So that's a much bigger audience. Maybe this is their onboarding, experience. And then there's like, the folks that have never tried anything to, crypto related before. And to your point, like don't see them going straight to this Uniswap app.
But part of me wonders, to go back to one of the things you were saying, Miles, is just like what the conversations were. And, you submit an application, they assign you a reviewer, and then you start the conversation with that reviewer to basically say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the things you need to change. Like it is a dialogue to a certain extent. I would wonder if part of that dialogue was this cannot be a custodial experience in the same way that, Apple is preventing in a lot of ways, the Coinbase application or the Coinbase wallet application, which they talked about. If they have to list all the different networks, if it has to be a separate wallet where you can't import your private keys, like I wonder if these are limitations. And this is kind of what having dealt with the App Store review team a few times, I wonder if that's just like limitations that they said, okay, you want to have this is what we need. And I also think, the other thing too, just as a blanket statement on App Store reviews is, like I said, it's an auto append list of all the different rules, and it's ever increasing, never decreasing. Yeah. But it's also not suggestive that because Uniswap got in with this particular format, that they are able to then build a playbook around this, and all the other applications that want App Store approval are going to have to go the same route and build the same way as Uniswap. It is really a specific use case by use case for each of the different applications that are going through the process. So doesn't mean like because Uniswap got in, it's, we now have a playbook for how to get every other app in. It's really just like because Uniswap got in, this is a big signal that maybe there's an open dialogue that could be had.
Yeah. And similar to the staking dialogue on the regulatory side, I think this general direction that we're getting now is like the more of just a, pass through you are, or like, a way to interact with the protocol rather than, making the experience, doing things, like outside of the protocol that make the experience better or smoother, that protects you a little bit. But it would be, too bad if that was actually stopping them from like doing things that don't necessarily make this a custodial app. Like, I think if you put in like a DEX bridge aggregator, something like a socket network behind the scenes here, it's still not custodial, right? You're just abstracting the UX complexity away a little bit, right? But if the Apple Store is saying, it has to be kind of wonky and complicated because like that's what a true, just pass through to like interact with the protocol should look like, then we're in a tough spot. But account abstraction also does help a lot with at least some of these pain points.
A lot of people focus, especially in crypto, right? Like it's very easy to be like, hey, Apple's trying to throttle us and all this stuff. And people focus on the 30% take rate that Apple takes in their app store. But the truth is, from Apple's perspective, that they're trying to, when apps originally, started to get launched, there were tons of scams and really poor user experiences. And part of the reason why Apple has that append-only list is to protect users, right? Like they view when people go to the App Store, Apple wants you to be able to trust that you're not going to get scammed and that your experience is generally going to be relatively good. So to be honest with you, I can actually sort of, if this is what the conversation sounded like, I could definitely see it from Apple's perspective that like, hey guys, like people lose their private keys all the time. This is an insane user experience. Like we don't want the liability of our brand, or this isn't the experience that we want our users to have.
I could be wrong, just wanted to call it out, but I'm pretty sure it did give me the option either to create a new wallet or import.
You can.
Some
Yeah, you can.
And Miles, could you sign up with like with an email address? Or
because I spun up a new wallet and then chose the most Web 2 path to onboard through that. That it was fairly easy. It was basically sending your choosing a Google account and doing a 2-step verification there, and then I think I had to select back up your keys with iCloud or something like that, which I'm sure.
So how does this little thing get through? I just looked this up. This is the only Uniswap app in the App Store right now. It's a fake. That's a scam.
Yeah, you have to actually like click the link of the from their Twitter post. Yeah, Apple.
That frankly is just like a App Store. It's so new that it hasn't been picked up by like the search algorithms yet. That happens a lot though. I mean, so Mike, I totally agree with all of what you were saying. I do think that, my personal perspective, just broadly, not on like apps specifically, is that it did start off as a form of protection to make sure that the quality of the apps that are in the App Store is as high as possible. I do think, and there are a number of lawsuits ongoing currently that contend that Apple is extracting monopolistic power with its 30%. So yeah. I agree with that. The intention probably started off to make sure that the quality bar was high, but at this point, there is no level of competition. There's no opportunity unless you're in a specific category where they don't want to support their payment method, where they force you to use the 30% fee.
It's always a little bit of both. People tend to view it in binary, but usually there is like a good reason for that being the case, and then there's probably a more extractive reason, and they can both be true.
So the fact that I think is the biggest one is when you are using Apple IAP to make purchases within your app, they're charging 30% whenever someone's making a purchase. It's only for digital content, so something that effectively has a zero marginal cost to produce, and therefore they feel like 30% is fair. But also they have hundreds of millions of credit cards and people on the other side of that. So not only are they just saying, hey, we're going to sit right here in the middle and charge 30%, we're also going to create the ability for the demand side to just easily onboard and seamlessly pay for things. So I do think that there is a benefit to it in certain situations. But once again, when you have selling of digital content, in the case of crypto, it's NFTs. When you're selling convertible virtual currencies like ETH and USDC, it doesn't have to go through IAP. That's where MoonPay steps in. I also have had, I don't know if you guys have used MoonPay. Miles, one question I was going to ask you is, have you previously used MoonPay, and did you have a track record with them? Or okay, the first, yeah.
No, I did. Yes, and then a picture of my ID and do like a little liveness check, all that good stuff.
Yep, exactly. And it's debit card only. And the auth rates on those, depending on what your bank rate, depending on what your bank is, the auth rates are, I've seen somewhere in like the 60 to 70%. So 30 to 40% of those transactions aren't even going through.
Wow.
I did see that. Yeah. It said if you use a credit card, or if you use a debit card, there's a 35% greater chance it will go through. What is that? Okay.
No bueno. I will say though, even though I think all of these are really fair criticisms, Miles, is that, good on Uniswap for doing this, right? Like, I think, historically the journey for people going on chain has been having their first experience be with a centralized exchange and then staying there for like a long time and then kind of migrating to on chain. And this is, I think, the first like meaningful shot that we've had at just onboarding people directly onto being on chain, which I think is definitely a step in the right direction.
100% agree. One of the things that I think is going to be really interesting to see is how does Uniswap the protocol interface with Uniswap the wallet, and what's the business model respectively for each of those? And stakeholders, is the team now moving over into Uniswap, the wallet and focusing on that? Are they going to be charging an additional fee on top of that and have it be a centralized business? That was kind of, what people were talking about when they raised all that money. It will be interesting to see like how you can have centralized businesses that are spawned out of decentralized protocols that then are extracting additional rent on top of the protocols that they originally built. I think that part is going to be really fascinating to see if, the competition drives that down, or if they're able to build a beachhead with customers to be able to have a user retail flow actually, derive value for Uniswap, the wallet. Going to be interesting.
I think you can make a similar like analogy to the way that Ethereum has kind of scaled and developed. I think Uniswap, similar to Ethereum L1, you keep the protocol, as conservative as possible. And there's very little that they're doing, at the protocol level. They just kind of upgrade right to another version every couple of years. And you drive the complexity and the really complex stuff that's going to help you scale and get distribution, up the stack basically. And in this case, it's out of governance, but, I would say like the Ethereum analogy is where, you're seeing the rollups and all of the account abstractions starting, on that's far away from the L1 as possible and the MEV supply chain. And so I think that's kind of the strategy here. And frankly, I mean, it's a lot easier to build, sort of these products outside of the scope of governance. And I think that's the main thing here. I would say, my other observation is that I think they're going for less of, a wallet, but more of like this, app or super app that has a wallet attached to it, right? I don't think they want to like make people think that they're downloading a wallet. I think eventually they'll show up and they'll see like, okay, here's, a portfolio of different, things I can do and apps I can use, and whether or not they skim, something off the top or even, implement like an order flow auction sort of model here. And that to me would make a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that only accrues directly back to Uniswap Labs in terms of the revenue, but the volume, if they're successful, right, drives value to Uniswap protocol.
Yeah, it's it's almost like if they had optimized in their UX for retail users and you're producing a bunch of dumb order flow, that'd be pretty good timing if order flow auctions become more and more prevalent, right? That'd be an extremely good revenue model. Although again, just to like take the other side of this, if I were designing the UX for this wallet, one of the examples that would be burned into my brain is Coinbase's launch of their NFT platform, which was a pretty big flop. And like, think about all the takes after that, which was like, all you had to do was replicate the design of OpenSea and you would have been golden, and instead they tried to make it more Web 2y. And who knows, this is probably a challenge that people on the internet might remember. I just wasn't around, but there's probably a challenging period of time where the users that existed were like very techie users, right? Who knew how to like use the browser and stuff like that. And eventually they had to make the transition to mainstream. But I'm sure there was a really tough period of time where, UX and UI people were sort of stuck in the middle. But Miles, I had a question for you actually that was, So one of the maybe challenges, maybe opportunities in between Uniswap Labs and Uniswap, the DAO, is that you've got two different instruments, with appreciation there. There's like Uni the token, and then there's Uniswap Labs equity.
Mhm.
So in an ideal world, you mentioned in account abstraction, where it's a no-brainer, right, for the protocols to pay for gas fees. Now, where would they, I would assume the way that Uniswap would afford to do that, right? It wouldn't be a permanent thing, but they would do it for some period of time. From Uni, the token, right? They would sell off some of their treasury in Uni token, or no? You think it would come from Uniswap Labs?
Yeah, I think I could be wrong, and this hasn't been implemented on one of the rollups yet. But I do get the sense that Uniswap Labs would basically just fund this paymaster that provides that pays gas on behalf of users. I honestly think that that's a good potentially a good investment, a good positive ROI for them.
Moats, can you explain that? Can you say more?
Yeah, so it's basically with imagine this is on a roll up with account abstraction, and you've got these are all 4337 transactions instead of regular transactions. So without going into it too much, this will basically run through its own mempool, right? That sits above kind of the main execution environment, and the transactions are bundled and relayed over to basically a paymaster. And I believe that you can say, set the parameters of the paymaster so that any address that has been identified as a Uniswap wallet address is eligible to be, okay, I'll pay gas for you. And then let's say another 4337 transaction comes in that's not from Uniswap wallet, then they would have to pay for their own gas. I could be wrong. I really honestly just started thinking about this as I was testing it out today. But to me, that sounds like something that would likely come from Uniswap Labs. I think they could fund basically a gas account.
Especially if if you default to an L2,
right?
And that becomes the default location for where these assets, as they're put in from USD, originate in the application itself. I mean, I think that obviously would alleviate a lot of the user onboarding flow for the archetype of user that you were pretending to be, Miles, and honestly would probably be a really interesting test just to see, what account abstraction actually can bring in terms of user growth. And there are plenty of other roadblocks in the onboarding flows as we discussed, but I think that would be a huge one, especially for someone who's never been in crypto before.
Yeah, 100%. I think the motivation to, or I guess the incentives to vertically integrate up the stack into your own wallet, are really, really powerful. You're, just cementing that relationship with the user by having them, also be not only the app you interact with, but the touch point to interact with the app. I think that, prior to account abstraction and still today, because we've got probably a year until account abstraction is really widely implemented, there's very few apps that had the amount of leverage over their users and the network itself to say, we're going to build an EOA wallet and put people through this, experience. And Uniswap's one of them. OpenSea is the other one. And it's awesome to see what the first version of this could look like with the Uni wallet. But I think that this idea of headless wallets that is enabled with account abstraction, or another way of framing it is embedded wallets, which is possible. It's going to open this vertical integration or vertical expansion up to a lot of different apps that don't have that same level of leverage.
And just to piggyback on that concept, one of the dominant conversations that at least we're having with games, and games have probably the potential to be one of the largest, and I think historically they also have been the largest N in terms of users per application on chain. And as more games launch, I think we'll be able to see more of that on chain. But a lot of those users are not paying customers. They're free to play users that come in And, if there is an actual cost to playing, maybe they wouldn't come in, maybe they wouldn't convert. But that's probably the dominant narrative right now, which is, how do we get rid of what they call the wallet wall? How do we have somebody sign up for this game? There's a wallet that's created on the back end. It's pre-funded by the company that's building the game itself. If there are any on-chain transactions that are abstracted away from the user and paid, the gas is paid on behalf of the company itself. And I think that that's going to be kind of generally how these consumer applications grow and launch and scale. And then it just becomes a question of like, how long are you willing to subsidize the gas fees for a user who doesn't pay? It's going to make the point of monetization for these users be at different levels than what we've seen for previous games or previous applications, just because there is this operating cost, this cost associated with every single user that comes on chain. So it's going to be really interesting, but that's a dominant conversation that's happening in the games ecosystem right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like it's a future cost of revenue line item for
Right.
most, right? So retention and an acquisition.
You know what else isn't? It just something that we've talked about in previous episodes is Coinbase's wallet as a service offering as well. So now you might get this super potent combination of account abstraction happening at the same time that Coinbase will whitelist a wallet for you. And it just solves two of these enormous pain points to the point where app developers can focus on building their applications that people actually want to use. And Miles, you and I talked a lot about the Fappening, which is the fat happening. Interesting title for a Z Prime article, but it's the idea that there could be these gigantic fat apps in crypto, and it's kind of like who ultimately owns the relationship with the customer. Is it the wallet? And maybe the user experience is you have your wallet and it gives you really easy access to all these different apps that you want to use. So you would like open your wallet on your phone and kind of use that. Or maybe it's the app that the user feels the tight relationship with, and ultimately starting with the app and then having a nice wallet built on top of that, like Uniswap, is just going to ease the friction of people doing what they already wanted to do, which was use the app. And then that's kind of your Trojan horse way in, which honestly, as I say it out loud, that sounds a lot more, that sounds like that's the way it's going to play out.
Sorry, can we double click into that? Like, are you saying that an application would plug into the Uniswap application? So like you have a game that's downloaded or an application that's downloaded, and you've got Uniswap that's downloaded all on your phone, all on your home screen. You've pre-funded your Uniswap wallet, your Uniswap app, and other applications would be able to leverage account abstraction via your Uniswap wallet?
Or it's maybe that, Uniswap either through expanding horizontally themselves or by finding close partners, right? You log in, like they are the aggregator essentially, where you are, on the Uniswap wallet home screen, because they started with a protocol. They built a brand off of that. Now they have like enough leverage over the user that they'll take him with them. And then it's a question of, okay, now we've got you here. How do we keep you here and buying and doing more and more things, right? And then it's like a buy partner build sort of exercise on their end to determine if they like pull in, other apps that are close partners, or if they want to like, do more acquisitions or expand horizontally.
Everybody wants to be the backend wallet service provider. It's so funny. It's like, it reminds me of, I don't know, maybe like 10, 15 years ago, where everybody wanted to build like the dominant JavaScript framework to build web apps in. And it was like, okay, we've got 12 dominant JavaScript. I'm going to build one that's going to supersede all of them. And like, congratulations, now we have 13 dominant JavaScript.
But I think there's a big opportunity for other wallet as a service companies to compete with Coinbase, because there are a lot of companies that are not going to use Coinbase's wallet as a service because they compete with Coinbase in one way or another.
Yeah, I'd say there's no shortage of them in the space right now. Just from having conversations, it's like a very, very hot area. And I think that there's a spectrum of different kind of solutions here, with like Coinbase wallet as a service being on one end of the spectrum, where basically, you let Coinbase also have the ability to help you recover your keys. So it's almost like this, I could be wrong. It's like,
Coinbase only gives you the SDK. Like if you want a UI UX on top of it too, like let's say you're Macy's and you want to give someone a wallet as a service, but like you don't want just the SDK, you want like a nice front out of the box. Like you might use Bitski's wallet as a service, or Magic has a wallet as a service. So it's like, I think it's how much of the stack do you want to control, basically?
Right, exactly. Even Fireblocks is getting in, getting into all these games with more like retail or like, B2B to C sort of offerings. And then, the other side of the spectrum, you've got like Economy and, like OX Pass and a few other really interesting providers. Even the Safe SDK is another one that are kind of building this, you've got like a suite of tools and bells and whistles that you can add to this, app specific wallet that's all, white labeled for your brand and everything like that. And it's just all happening in the background. I see that's kind of, one of the big unlocks of account abstraction is this idea of, having an account on every app you use without having to spin up this, painful wallet experience.
I do wonder though, like every single application has an account that's abstracted for you, specifically for you. You have some assets that are in there. Maybe they're NFTs, maybe it's ETH, maybe USDC. It doesn't really matter. Like going to the 100 different applications that you have used at some point and going and retrieving the residual value that's left in those wallets is going to be painful.
Yeah.
Like there is a fragmentation issue where it would be nice, hypothetically, if there was a single wallet and it was a white label service and everybody could just have that be the one thing, and everybody's trying to be that one thing, right? But fragmentation becomes an issue.
Yeah, it's either, I see two solutions. It's like you have, one EOA that is kind of like your actual bank account, right? And then you can let, that EOA control these other smart accounts that are like, your Venmo balance equivalent. Or you've got a service provider opportunity to aggregate all your accounts on some other app, right? It's like if you used Google to sign in to create a smart account, like aggregate every, smart account associated with my Google login.
Right.
Like that.
I think I kind of understand why. I've heard Fred Wilson actually on a podcast a couple of years ago. He had this little line that stuck with me, which was he never really could. He had this idea that actually your Google Maps or your Apple Maps should be kind of your home screen of choice for something like Uber, right? So instead of signing into Uber, the app, you would just log on to Google, and then you could like call an Uber to your location, or you could order food from your location. But he just kind of it never really played out. And I kind of think the reason for that is like the simplest, the easy, you already have a wallet. It's called your phone, So like when you want to do something like call an Uber or order food, I don't want to log into another app on my phone and then go through that. I just want to be able to go to it the quickest way possible, and I sort of think that's why it hasn't necessarily played out like that.
I would also say there's just such a huge vested interest in Uber maintaining that customer relationship that they would never want to be, a feature in Google Maps.
Totally. And that's another good reason why, like none of the apps that ultimately end up gaining a whole bunch of users and they have funds and traction and all that stuff, they're going to be incentivized to not just be a feature in a wallet.
Well, and you could go to, and the equivalent would be, you could say, okay, I want to leverage the Google Maps API and we're going to build a big partnership with them. And like, Uber, Google Maps wants to actually now have us be a feature within their map. It's like, okay, great. We'll just go to Apple Maps or Mapbox or any of the other providers and have the same experience. Like competition ultimately will drive this in the direction of, I think, where, probably the best outcomes will exist. And frankly, Uber would not be a service. They wouldn't be able to test different applications. They wouldn't be able to test different services that they provide if they weren't their own standalone application. So I'd much rather have Uber be a standalone app that, versus a feature within, a Maps application, even though that may be, in some ways a better user experience. But I think the best user experience is having a sustainable business that can provide car services, as a standalone application.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think the big difference there is that like Uber can actually, block people from like the only way you can use Uber is through their own app, right? Where I would say like there will be, say like an Aave, right? They're like they can't block people from using Aave, by saying that you can only use it through like the Aave specific app or wallet in this case. So it's a little bit more challenging to kind of create those moats, I would say, and really, own the relationship here because there's so many different entry points to interact with these protocols.
I wonder if another challenge too, just from a marketing standpoint, is Netflix doesn't when it's advertising or doing its marketing, Netflix doesn't go around and say, hey, subscribe to Netflix. What it does is it advertises its shows. So you're like, hey, this show looks good. I want to go watch that show. So if you're only a wallet, the way you get people to sign up is, hey, we're a great wallet. Download our wallet. And then immediately my reaction in my head is like, I don't want to download something else. I already have so many apps on my phone. I'm loaded up with apps here. But if you start from the perspective of Uniswap and I'm like, oh, I want to trade. Oh, and they have this wallet. Like, yeah, I'll just do that. And I think it might just be like it's eliminating a step instead of adding something else on your phone.
I think that's right.
I was also going to say, not to like put the cart in front of the horse here, but like, okay, great. You've loaded up your wallet. You've loaded up your Uniswap account. You put some cash on. You've traded some coins around. Like, what next? Is it, sort of the Miles description of like the app store within Uniswap that has the Uniswap backend for the wallet, maybe account abstraction, eases the onboarding. Are you able to take those assets off of Uniswap easily and use them in other applications, like from iPhone app to iPhone app? And it does beg the question as to, and definitely have done my fair share of trading crypto tokens, but what next? I think is kind of the question that I get to.
Because that's not like a, come back every single day sort of activity, right? You'll get them there, but then you need ways to keep that engagement up. And I think that's, again, I think that's probably expanding horizontally into like complementary products. And whether or not they just, they like, Compound, you can come on this now, or whether they decide to actually, build out this stuff themselves will be interesting.
Yep. Can we talk about the Saga, Solana's phone? Because actually that kind of segues into, Michael, what are you going to say before we go?
I was just going to say the one thing that I do know that Apple hates is app stores within apps.
That's true. That's true. Interesting.
Hurts the monopoly. Yeah. But let's talk a little bit about Solana. So Solana a little while ago announced Saga, which is going to be their foray into their own Android phone. And it's got it's sort of the first swing at a crypto-friendly mobile stack. So the reason we're talking about this now is they just announced that the Saga is going to be available for customers in the United States, EU, UK, Canada, Switzerland, Australia, and New Zealand. You're going to be able to order the phone starting on May 8th. And the whole point basically is you're trying to integrate Web3 into a mobile experience, which the majority of users in crypto are mobile, at least as designated by kind of web traffic and stuff like that. There hasn't really been a great mobile experience so far. And being vertically integrated into a phone and a full stack sort of mobile suite, that allows you to do things that you couldn't do if you only controlled the software. So there are 4 kind of pillars to Saga, which are, it's got a seed. You can, it's like crypto native. You can store your seed phrase mobilely. There's a vault that's built into the phone. There's a mobile wallet adapter. There's Solana Pay, and there's a Solana Dap Store. So kind of in reverse order there, Michael, you were talking about some of the pains, right, that these apps are going to have going through the Apple Web Store. Well, now Solana has basically tried to take matters into its own hand, and they have their own Dap Store that comes native on the phone. They also have Solana Pay, which is kind of exactly as it sounds. Like, think about like Apple Pay or Venmo on your phone, how easy it is when you just like use which I use all the time now, Apple Pay. I use it almost exclusively, but you just go like ding it at a register or something like that. The theory is you could do that with Solana as well. So I think it sounds super cool. It's definitely like a big, bold swing at something, which I always root for when people do big, bold swings. I think the challenge is there's a big difference between being a software organization and then a hardware organization, which is like definitely more capital intensive, more operationally intensive, and definitely folks have struggled kind of trying to do that in-house. So I don't know what you guys think. I think it'd be very cool if it works. It's definitely going to be a challenge as well, though.
I, as an anecdote, I was actually having dinner with one of my good friends, actually the guy that introduced me in Vance originally,
Really?
last night. And he has been working, he works for a large technology company based in Cupertino. And he has been working on a project for, I think, over 7 years at this point. He and I were actually interns there in 2011, which is how we met. And has been working on this hardware project and working his butt off too for the last number of years. And I think the thing that you don't really necessarily see is how hard hardware really is, especially when you're going up against behemoths, like the Apples, the Metas of the world, where when they are doing an R&D project, their budget for R&D is unlimited. It is infinite. It is something where there's no venture-backed company that can come close to competing. Even Meta, to a certain extent, has had to shut down, a lot of the Oculus stuff that they were working on when they started to cut costs. Reality Labs, exactly. The whole all of the things that are in the components of Saga, I hope that their phone is good enough, because I completely agree with all the directions that the phone could be taken. But it is just so hard to build good hardware at scale and have that be something that's usable, such that I want to be carrying around this device to be able to pay for things in person. And I think that's just ultimately going to be the biggest challenge, how you can build a hardware organization. And the other anecdote I have is when I was at Snap, one of the big things that we were working on was the spectacles. And that was a completely separate team. That was a completely separate operation. And frankly, they had to be completely separate because you had to run the company completely separately. And it's not something that you can mix and match, or it's very incredibly difficult to mix and match hardware and software. And there are probably only, a few examples, Apple being one of them, that has done it well. But it is just an exceedingly difficult technical problem as well as organizational issue. So I hope the best, frankly. But those are the roadblocks that I foresee.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think it's great that they're taking a big swing at this. I can see the rationale, right? We just talked about the Apple Store issues, right? And how that is really, a dependency risk, right? For the growth of mobile, crypto apps. And two, if you just look back at, the apps that have driven the most usage on Solana, for the most part, they're gaming, very, retail friendly apps, right? That are best, interacted with on mobile. And I would say maybe that's generally what they're going for. They're trying to reduce dependency risk, and they're trying to make these, I would say, Web3 retail, focused apps as good as possible. But I did get the sense that a lot of that activity was coming from Asia when it was at its peak. And so I think it is interesting, but I don't see, I would be curious to know how much of those users are actually in these countries where this will be available.
Yeah.
Because, Apple's just got such an enormous moat in the US at least. And, Android's much more common in other parts of the world. And so if I were them, I'd be, thinking about going to those users. But
I think there's a lot to learn. I think there's a lot to learn from the Amazon phone. So in 2014, Amazon released the Fire, if you guys remember that, and they were trying to compete with, so it's the iPhone, Galaxy, and the Google Pixel. And there are two main reasons I think that failed. The Amazon phone failed. First is like Michael was saying, they spent all this time on hardware and features that were really flashy and sexy, but users didn't actually want. And I think their big thing that they were really focused on in 2014 was 3D. And then so that made the phone really expensive. But then once they released it, they realized that no one actually needed or wanted those features. And then the second thing is that they forked the Android operating system and they came out with the Fire OS operating system. And so what that meant was that and their thesis for doing that is they're like, oh, this is going to create this huge ecosystem of apps and app builders and developers who want to come build these new experiences on top of the Fire OS ecosystem. But what ended up happening in reality is a year after launching, it was basically just a dead ecosystem and there were no good apps. So a year after launching, there's still no Google Maps competitor on the Fire OS. And so I think that you can make a comparison to the Solana phone. So we played around with it at the Blockworks office today. The flashy feature comparison could be there are all these really cool things you can do in it. So you can take a picture and immediately mint that picture as an NFT. And like that's something I'm like, oh, that's cool, but like I don't really know if people want to do that. So and there's like a lot of those kind of features in there. And then the operating system too. It's like, yeah, they have their whole dApp store. And that's just like if there end up being these like use cases on top of Solana and like on top of crypto native, like people build fun things to do on crypto rails, then like, yeah, that booms. But it could also be an ecosystem that like there's not much action happening. So I think that's a decent comparison to make, is looking back at the flop of the Fire Phone to see what went wrong there.
I mean, keep in mind, Apple did not open up the app developer store or the ability for third-party developers to come onto the platform for 2 years. It was only the official Apple.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It was only the official Apple apps that were approved, and then I think in 2009 was the first year with the 3G.
Oh, you're saying Apple, not Amazon. Oh, the Apple.
Apple didn't allow third-party developers onto the App Store until I think it was the iPhone 3G, which was 2 years after the first gen. So I think there is an element of like, you need to prove out the hardware, you need to prove out the use cases. But here's a different question. What are the probably like most used applications that you have in crypto right now?
Coinbase?
Like Uniswap or like I'm saying like dApps. But the point is, like, if Solana was to have those dApps as applications that were in their dApp store, as opposed to specifically Solana applications, would that make it more, useful? Like my take is yes. Like the advantage here could be just having an open ecosystem for dApp developers to get into a mobile experience, a mobile hardware, and not necessarily have it be limited to a single blockchain. That could be, kind of what I would say.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Maybe
I agree with that.
I do too. I also, people don't really talk about it like this a lot, but if you are able to, and by the way, every point taken there, Michael, that it's very difficult in terms of to execute right on hardware versus software. But if you are successful in manufacturing a hardware device that people actually want to use, it's really effective distribution. Like people forget, like that's how Microsoft kind of, they cleaned up back in the day doing exactly that. And I have heard, it's hard for Zuck to, bemoan at all how Facebook has played out. But I also know that part of the reason why they've invested so much in Reality Labs is, there was a strategic decision to be only software for a while, and they kind of regretted never having the hardware and the vertical integration there. So again, it's kind of like, if you can execute it, it might pay off super well. But it also could be a big bet. And yeah, I don't know. I always just like to support big bets that are taken.
I'm rooting for it too. I'm definitely rooting for
100%.
it.
Yeah. Guys, I know we talked about this last week, but it does, this is happening in basically one day. We got Shapella coming up. So Michael, I know you had, some initial thoughts there. I don't want to, keep hitting the audience with stuff we've already talked about, but what are your sort of updated thoughts on Shapella?
My updated thoughts are kind of what the narrative is on Twitter right now, which is it seems to have gone decently well. There's some talk of some of the blocks are not, or I don't know exactly what's going on, but it seems like some of the mining pools are missing proposals, which suggests just some network issues. But I do think the big thing to note is the withdraw queue is probably not as large as most people suspected. It was interesting to see that the withdraw queue leading up to the actual hard fork was about half the size of what was signaled for withdraw after the hard fork happened, which just kind of tells me people maybe forgot about it and maybe, they saw what happened and they said, oh, now I'll signal for withdraw. But yeah, generally it looks like about 150 million of ETH is going to be able to be withdrawn per day. And that will probably take another like 10 to 15 days to process. Unclear whether or not that's desired to sell or whether or not it's just movement of assets. One thing that we were talking about was tax day is officially 5 days away from when we're recording this. So, there could be some element of that. Interesting timing to have the withdraw queue available. But yeah, I'd say probably a lot less than what we expected is kind of the summary from our end.
Yeah. I don't have many updated thoughts. I sort of agree with all that.
Yeah, me either. It'll be interesting to see just how fast the withdrawal queue kind of returns back to what could be like a normal level going forward, and what that, time actually looks like to withdraw. Like, is it, a couple days, or is it 2 weeks? I think that actually does impact like the pricing for LSDs.
One additional point. I did see some, and this was last night, so the data may have changed, but it looked like almost 70% of the assets that were in the withdrawal queue were coming from Kraken specifically, which, if you remember, they are required to send back all of that ETH, withdraw all that ETH. So, even the numbers that we're seeing could be overinflated by specific actors in situations like that.
Yeah.
I think I generally think that crypto underestimates the likelihood of bad things happening. So I sort of tend to come into these sorts of events with a negative bias. But I do think that people generally kind of overstated the concern. And the question that I have to you guys is, because this was the sort of strong consensus going into this like 1 or 2 months ago that we've talked about a lot, is there's going to be this initial dip as people unstaked, and then there was going to go back up. But my question to you guys is, like, how much withdrawn ETH do you think people would need to see to be satisfied that withdrawals actually work? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's some amount of, okay, I actually want to withdraw my stake so I can pay my taxes, or because I haven't had liquidity in a number of years. But also, just as likely could be likely that over the first couple of days, you see some amount of ETH successfully able to be withdrawn. The market decides, wow, this has just been de-risked, right? I've seen, or I've heard, my friends or this fund that I know, and people tweet about it publicly, they withdrew their ETH. So then actually the deposit queue ends up, it ends up netting out sort of positively, and there isn't really even that period of dip. Could happen like that too. I don't know.
Kraken withdrawing $1 billion should, if they can do that, then should have pretty good confidence that
it's doable.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we should check back on the numbers in a week from now and see where everything nets out from. Because I did see at certain points there were large deposits, as well as the consistent withdrawals. And at certain points in time before I think Kraken really got into it, there were actually more deposits in than there were withdrawals.
Yeah. Maybe just as a closing, story here, I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this idea of like the U.S. falling behind in crypto. So A16Z kind of put out this report, and you actually saw Avichal Garg over at Electric Capital kind of, raise the alarm bell or ring the fire alarm or whatever analogy, what have you, that the U.S. in terms of developer activity is actually falling way behind. And for like a good portion of at least my time in crypto, I've kind of heard these calls that the United States is falling behind in crypto, but I haven't really seen much evidence of that. I would say until recently, there are kind of starting to emerge like real signs that we might actually be in danger of losing this race. And it's not like some overwhelming, tsunami of information, but, anecdotally here and there, I see less funds that are being, formed or domiciled in the US. I see more like DAOs, move to be constituted outside of the US. Like more of the interesting projects that are getting funded are based in Asia. It seems like Abu Dhabi and Vara are being like very, very serious about their desire to attract crypto talent. Even Hong Kong seems to be making a real play at crypto, which tacitly I think we can understand to be China saying at least, hey, this is okay in our sort of regulatory sandbox playground. So, I think it's definitely still too early to call, but it really actually does, for the first time, at least since I've been in crypto, seems like it's genuinely shifting outside of the US.
So Rob Leschner came on Empire, and one of the things that he mentioned, because he does a lot of investing out of Robot Ventures, is they advise founders not to be in the United States anymore. He's like, yeah, it's just not worth it. And he's like, look, if I started Compound all over again, it's like I wouldn't do it from the States again.
It's part of our evaluation criteria whenever we look at an investment.
Wow.
Say more about that, Michael. So like you get like a ding if they're based in the US?
It's going to be more difficult, yes. So you have to understand, what that implies. You're going to be operating with one, if not both hands tied behind your back. And regulation by enforcement is sort of like you don't want to say anything because if you're too loud, you might get clipped. So there is an element of I would say simultaneously, and this is what the presentation goes through, is like there are actually positive regulatory perspectives that are happening in Singapore, Hong Kong, Eastern or Western Europe. Like there are places to go where you can have this company operate in the way that you want it to, that are not, out of left field countries that you'd have to move to, and it would be a crazy place to live. These are very well established, and even some with major tech centers. So that's largely where a lot of the decentralized protocols that we look at for investment, are coming from, just because they recognize the same things that we do.
Now, Michael, do you notice that these are like most of these teams you talk to are expats that have left the States or less friendly regimes, or are they, for the most part, folks from these regions?
I would say not necessarily from those regions in particular, but probably from somewhere that then moved to that region to be there. I would also say there's a huge difference between the breakdown of the team versus the founding team. Yeah. Where are you getting engineering or design or product resources? Where are they from originally? Versus the founding team. That is a difference as well. But yeah, usually it's the founders. Where are you based is a question, or are you willing to be based elsewhere is a question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always gotten the sense that the Solana ecosystem was very Silicon Valley, kind of based. And so, I think Ethereum, we rarely meet teams that are located, or at least like the legal entity is never headquartered in the United States, right? No chance. But I would be curious to know, some of these Web 2.5 teams, if they're feeling the heat too.
Without clarity, and I'm not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to be one, but without clarity, it's not worth it. And we've already started to see some of these enforcement actions, specifically going after U.S. persons. It doesn't matter whether or not the company is Cayman or what have you. If you're living and working in the U.S., they can find nexus there.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's definitely not over yet. But if there are any regulators or policymakers that are listening to this, I think I don't want to speak for everyone on this call, but I think I can say we all want this to be a U.S. led industry, right? Like I would love it if crypto flourished in the U.S., but definitely it's not destiny, right? That it has to be based out of here. So.
Yeah, and last thing I'd say is, we do think that we will get to clarity at some point in the next year or two. There's a lot of push in DC to at least have some understanding of what the regulatory situation will look like. And this is what Brian Armstrong talks about all the time. It's give us a playbook and we'll be able to operate and run with that. So don't get me wrong, we are not hopeful that this continues. I think we just need to know where the black and white lines are and stop living in this point of gray.
Yeah, agreed. All right, fellas, on that slightly somber note, we can maybe end it. But this was a good one. And I got I was in Texas for this last week, and I got a special t-shirt for Michael, and he promised that he was going to wear it next time.
Which one is the question of whether or not I'll wear it?
I'll tell you. I'll read you out the slightly less controversial one, because there were a couple that would not be Adam approved. Let's put it like that. But it says Noah was a conspiracy theorist, then it rained. Which I actually think that's a pretty funny one. So
that one might be a better Vance t-shirt, but
yeah, right. Honestly, Vance with that and the tinfoil hat, I think that'd be a real winner. That could be a nice little get up. But
100%.
All right, fellas.